Today in Crazed Performance Repair, we're going to continue the build for the Mustang. We're going to go ahead and get the engine in the car now. If you have not seen any of the engine build videos, go ahead and click on the link in the corner. However, we have an engine back behind us, and we're going to go ahead and get this cradle dropped down. Obviously, we're going to have to pull the wheels off, get the cradle dropped down, get it on jack stands, go through the whole motion here of getting everything prepared. Then I get to put the engine onto the cradle, so I'm going to drop it down on there using these straps. Once it's down on the cradle, then I'm going to go ahead and start working on all the wiring and wiring harness things that are on this thing, because there's going to be quite a bit involved in doing the wiring harness alone. I know I have to deal with some power connections for the alternator, and then of course the turbos themselves are going to need oil lines, and I'm going to have to figure out how to do those before I even attempt to put this thing in the car. When I go to put this thing in the car, we're going to have to find out the hard way whether or not I can leave the exhaust and turbo section of things in place. I don't think I'll be able to, or if I'm going to be forced to. And if I'm forced to, that means I have to pull the whole front clip of the car off and slide everything in to the car rather than lift it up into the car or set the car down on it. So this should be interesting, and we'll go ahead and get started with the video here. Well, it's on here. It took a little more time than expected. But, stupid me, I have this strap looped around the motor around here, and that was the only way I could find to pick it up that was really decent. Now it's stuck. So, I guess I'm going to have to lift the motor up again, probably hold it up somehow, and then lift up on it to get it off one mount at a time, maybe. I don't know. It does have these 3 joints here that I can pull the bolt out and then take those little pucks out, and then maybe slide this out if I were to just support one side of the motor maybe. So that might be what I'll do. I'll figure it out. In the meantime, I'll get you guys right back when I start configuring things. Well, I got the straps up. Wasn't as bad as I thought. All I had to do was take a pry up on that area here, and then I just slid it out after I took the bolt off. So really wasn't that bad. But I'm kind of disappointed because I have to slide this engine assembly into the vehicle, which means I'm going to be pulling the front clip on this thing. I have to pull everything completely out. And to top things all off, the AC has to be disconnected. And to top that off, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 YF, I think, Freon. So it's a totally different kind of Freon. Requires a totally different kind of gauge. Requires a totally different kind of recovery machine, and is pretty much impossible to do because the fittings are not really available to attach to a gauge set yet. However, if I contaminate the Freon in here with a small amount of 134A, I do have my makeshift pump. I believe I can adapt to it to suck out what's in here and then recover it and put it back in here. Now, if I had to buy 1, 2, 3, 4 YF or whatever the heck this crap is, if I had to buy that, it is like $70 for a 12-ounce can. It's insanely expensive. Might as well be R12 because it's worth more than gold damn near. Well, not really, but seems like it. Might as well be gold-plated cans, and it's going to make things interesting. So I'm going to get started pulling the front clip off like I didn't want to originally, but I have to because there is no way it's going to fit. So the frame width on these cars is 31 inches, okay? That's the widest that I can fit through that frame channel. Now, this turbo assembly, if I exclude the turbos, just the header manifold or whatever you want to call it, it's 38 inches. So, think about that. 38 inches versus 31, not going to fit. So, no matter what, I have to slide this thing into the engine bay. So, I'm going to have to pull the entire front clip and then weasel everything by like this. I'm going to have to get the car at just the right height. And since this garage is so limited in space, it's going to make things very, very interesting to try and do. But I am indeed going to pull the front clip off. That's about my only choice at this point. And even that, I'm wondering, because of this flange right here, see how this actually sticks out a little bit. Even with this part of the bumper piece off, this flange sticks past that 31-inch section. So I'm a little concerned that I'm going to have issues with getting this flange to weasel around this area right here, because that's going to have to be shoved in like this. I might actually have to disconnect the frame, somehow either raise the motor up on the frame so everything's separated and bring it in like that. I honestly don't know. Maybe, you know what? I wonder if I could drop this thing in from the top. Why didn't I pull it up from the top? What was my restriction? I have to think about that. I do have some thinking to do. I might be able to do this thing from the top. I might have taken the wrong approach. Well, for taking it out, it was pretty easy doing it this way, but for putting it in, if I put it in through the top, the bottom of the motor is plenty narrow. That's not going to be an issue. I got some thinking to do. I definitely got some thinking to do. As you can see, I am tearing at it down below with this car as far as getting that front clip off. The front clip is going to be a bit of a challenge. I noticed a couple of things that I have to do for sure, and I understand why On3 Performance sent part of the kit that they did. And after several measurements, I can clearly see that this computer is going to be in the way for the turbos. It's going to be in the way for a lot of things. I'm going to have to slide the engine transmission assembly in from the front. There's no question about it. There's no way else I'm going to be able to do that. And that is why I also have it on my foldable two-wheel dolly here. So I put it on a two-wheel dolly so that I can roll this thing around. What I'm going to attempt to do is roll this thing to underneath the car, then pull it forward to my cramped space in the garage here. And I should have just enough room that I can lower the car to go over top of the transmission and then slide the engine assembly in from the front and squeeze it in there. I should be able to do it. Should is the key word there. I will find out, but it's going to be a challenge for sure. And of course, as I mentioned before, I'm also going to have to do something with the AC. I'm going to have to disconnect it, and I have a plan for that, and it requires my custom AC machine that I built several years ago, but I'm going to have to revert back to the unsafe tank for recovering the Freon, which you guys are going to frown upon, but I had to get intuitive and come up with some creative engineering so that I could do this job, because otherwise I feel like I might have some problems. So I'm going to go ahead and get at it, and I will let you guys know about the AC thing in possibly a separate video. If I do, it'll be in the link above. Otherwise, it will be in this video here. Well, I started putting this thing in there, and I came to a pretty quick halt. So this frame piece here, it's about equal on both sides, and you can see I'm just about against this manifold. If I lower this down, it contacts this guy here. I can maybe pull this off, but I don't think it's going to help, because once I get here, I'm going to have an issue with this to this clearance, so I'm not even going to bother wasting my time with that. What I need to do is I either need to find a way to lift this engine up and then give myself enough space so that I can bring this frame of the car above the subframe of the car and have the motor high enough up that it can weasel in, or I need to start from scratch here and actually put the subframe back in the car and then pull the motor and drop it in with the cherry picker. So I'm going to sit and do a little thinking and reconsidering on how I'm going to put this thing back in here. But I believe what my end result, what I'm leaning towards, is just getting the motor lifted up, held up by something on the cradle, and then rolling it in with my original plan, just higher on the frame than what I was originally planning. So I will try and figure out what I'm going to do, and then I will go ahead and show you guys right now. So I have some fittings here. I do not know what goes where. I do know these are large lines, though. So they are the bigger of the lines. This guy is a much smaller line. But I'm going to get started with pulling some lines off of there. Now, this is the packaging for that system. And on this packaging, it says, "Dear On3 Performance customer, there are 3 pieces to this AC relocation kit. We currently have 3 in stock." So first off, they got a typo right off the gate, right? They said there's 3 and they have 3 in stock. And then they're complaining about not having one because they say, and the 4th is on indefinite back order. So there's actually 4 pieces, and I'm missing one, is basically what they're saying. And then they give me a Ford part number here that I'm supposed to order want to see what happens when I look at this on here, and then maybe I'll look up the Ford part number and actually see what in the world that is supposed to be replacing. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and pull some stuff off of here, and once I figure out how to put that on, I'll bring you right back. But of course, this is all a big learning curve. So I have the AC all sucked out of the vehicle. I am going to go ahead and take all the nuts off of here that hold these fittings in place and see if I can figure out how to put these hoses in place, because I don't know how they go. And I'm also going to get the compressor off of here to put it on the motor before I slide everything into place. I think that's just going to be the most optimal solution here. So I will pull that completely off the compressor. Then I will pull this unit out of here, because why not? It's only one more nut. Then that'll be nice and clear and out of the way. And then I will try and figure out how these lines and stuff go in once I have the actual engine down into place here. I got the engine in place. I am not exactly happy with the results. I'm actually quite disappointed with how close everything is. And the reason I say that is, to me, this thing seems like a fire hazard. I mean, honestly, it seems like a fire hazard. And we'll get a little bit closer here to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. But this turbo kit, it sits in a position that I do not like it at all. You can see I had to pull one of these off. That's because of clearance issues with like this here. Just everything was in the way. Hindsight's 20/20, right? I should have put the cradle on first, then drop the engine in with it. The only major dilemma with doing that is there is no hooks on this engine to lift the engine from. And the only thing I could think of is if a guy had the intake off and then created a plate with a hook point for where the intake goes. You can't use these little 6mm bolts to lift the engine up, so you'd have to create some kind of plate to spread the weight among several of the bolts. But if I had done something like that, I could maybe have lifted it from there, and then it probably would have been easier, honestly, with how much work I had to go through. But this thing did not go easy at all, and I'll show you those little things that I'm a bit concerned about when it comes to putting this thing in here. Okay, so the wiring harness here, you can see this is, I'm going to have to disconnect that connection down there at the bottom there with that little pivot point, because I can't even get this thing moved over. It won't go anywhere. So this thing is going to have to be mounted differently. I don't know if I'm going to have to add wire extensions or what in order to do that, but it's definitely not going to fit the way that it is. This guy here, I can push him down and set it where it's supposed to be. That's not a big deal. But fire hazard wise, so I had mentioned before, very early in this series, that I did not like how this comes so close to the valve cover. And right now it is literally against the valve cover. So you can see the AC pipe or block there. It's against that AC block, and it's pushing against the valve cover. Now when I lift this thing up, it might clear it just a little bit, but it's barely going to leave any room whatsoever for both the valve cover and that block, if it leaves any room at all. So right now the motor and trans assembly are up a little bit. You can see the mount here. Try and get a better view for you. You see it's not all the way up, but that's what, a ½ inch maybe? So it's not a whole lot. I did destroy the oil filter trying to put it in here. It kept hitting this little corner there. The exhaust over here, you can see it's against the brake lines. We can't be having any of that. That's ridiculous. So I'm going to have to do something about that. That wiring harness that goes right along here, that thing is going to melt with the way it is. There's no way I can accept that. And then when you look at the wiring harness down there, it's also pretty much going to melt there too, because that heat shielding is only going to protect it for so long, and that pipe is definitely going to get hot. So this whole kit scenario I am not happy with so far as how it sits in the car. Had they done things the way they should have done things, they should have had just a big single mount turbo right here and maybe split the radiator in a couple of parts or something. It would have been better or smarter to do it that way. Doing it like they did here, I'm not a fan of. The exhaust, running it to the back the way that they did with this giant motor and this teeny little car, not very big fan of it. I am definitely not liking what I see. So ultimately, what am I going to do? Well, I can't let this thing go out like this. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten up the frame to bring it up as high as it's going to be and move around the motor because it's still, there's no bolts going into the bottom part of the motor mount, so it can be a little bit loose and shifted, and see if I can't get it centered a little bit better. If doing all that still leaves me with almost no room, which I imagine is what's going to happen, I'm going to have to find a way to move things around. I'm going to have to remove this wiring harness, rewire it somewhere else. Maybe I can, it's plenty long. I can take it out of the plastic cage that it's in, and then maybe I can run it around the back here. And then by doing so, maybe I can lift this one up that's over there and move that one somewhere else. Maybe I can remote mount the battery all the way to the back, put the electrical box in the battery box. There's a few things that I can do to work with the wiring harness. So I'm not as concerned about the wiring harness. There is a lot of wire here to work with. The only thing is, the lighting and stuff like that. If I go around the back there, I'm going to have to rewire that and extend that. But that's not too much wiring. A lot of these wires are grounds for the harness on the ends here. So the grounds I could put pretty much anywhere. That's not a big deal. So I'm not as concerned about the wiring. The brakes, however, I can redo the brake lines, bend them in a way that gets them a little bit further away from the exhaust. Maybe bring them around the front part of the turbo here and extend them or something. I could maybe do that. So that's an option. As far as the valve covers go, if I do that and I address the AC line, so this side I'm not as concerned about because if I take care of the wires and stuff like that, I can have it closer to the chassis of the car, and then it won't be a big deal. It'll be farther away from the valve cover and won't cause an issue. This side, if I can get it to shift further away from the engine so that I can have a little bit of an air gap between this Nepholic or plastic valve cover and the pipe itself. So that's not the end of the world. I might have to pull this whole thing out again. So I'm going to have to find a better way to do that if I do. But I do have to address that. There's no question about it. I can't leave everything where it is, where it's naturally wanting to be. It's just not going to work. Too many fire hazards, too much chance of a problem in the future. So if you're doing one of these on-3 kits, be very careful. Pay very close attention to what's going on there, and be warned, it is a son of a bitch to get this in here. So it's interesting. It's very interesting. I still haven't taken care of the alternator wiring scenario because I still have to put that wire lead on there, and I mentioned that earlier in I think a previous episode. It might have been this episode. But I do have to figure out what I'm going to do with that. I don't even have the main harness for the engine on the engine this time. I had planned on putting that on first before putting the engine in. I'm kind of glad I didn't because having that in my way right now just would make things even worse to put in here. I'm probably better off fishing it in. I'll have to look at that when I get to it. So, I know, a lot of talk in this video, but I have a lot of thinking to do, and that's why I'm talking so much about it. Normally, I don't like to ramble about fitment so much, but it's very, very, very important that we don't have this car light a fire as soon as he does his first pull, because obviously that's going to be catastrophic and wreck the car, let alone hurt the driver. We can't have a driver getting hurt. So I need to find a way to protect the driver and the car from a fire incident. Fuel line. Okay, so I got the fuel line coming up here. That shouldn't be a big deal. So the fuel line that I put in is out of the way. So I did something right on my part. It's too bad On3's kit does not fit very well. They could have done a much, much better job with this kit. There's so much more room in the front of this thing to work with than on the sides where they decided to put it. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I really don't. Maybe the alternator and AC, take the alternator, have it mount to the front. If I were to come up with a kit, okay, what would I do in a kit of my own? Let's get the hypothetical here. If they would have brought, so if the alternator, which it doesn't matter which way an alternator turns, except for in relation to the fan blade on the alternator for cooling the alternator. So if they took and made it a reverse rotating alternator, made the fan blades so that they would work, And they had the alternator come out here, some kind of brackets that bolt up to the timing cover to make the alternator sit this way. And then you have plenty of room to work with the alternator. You could have this exhaust manifold pipe. There's a gap here that it would fit through. So you could have it come through here. Alternator would be here. Your pipe could come down, go to the turbo. This one has all kinds of room right next to the AC compressor right here, that it could come this way, come down, go into the turbo. So those would be the manifold pipes. And then the turbo would sit here, of course. And then you could have your exhaust pipe. Even with the compressor the way it is, you could run a pipe, as long as you had it formed right, it could run right alongside this AC compressor. It would get the compressor hot, for sure. But if you heat shielded the pipe or double walled the pipe, it could go that way with one, and with the alternator moved, you'd have enough room here to go that way with another pipe, and you could make the system work. It'd be some interesting engineering, but with a large single, I feel like this would have a better option. Or, I don't like to say it, but this car belongs with a supercharger. It just makes more sense. Yep. Even after considering that, supercharger, done. Yeah, it's going to have to be a big supercharger to get the power the guy wants. Or rear mount. Why not rear mount? If the guy did a rear mount turbo, that wouldn't be the end of the world. Yeah, you'd have some lag, but this motor puts out a decent amount of torque. So what? A little bit of lag? Deal with it? Have a rear mount. Maybe that's the best option. I don't know. I don't know what the best option is. Let me know your thoughts. Yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do? Would you do... Remember, the goal here is over 1,000 wheel. Would you do a very large, expensive, crazy supercharger and have to deal with the detonation and heat issues in that supercharger without an ice box? Or would you do a large single or a rear mount turbo in the back? Or do you think this is the better option, even with all its quirks? I mean, they obviously thought this was the best option. I just don't see it. These turbos are too big for that area. The pipes going in it are too big, too much of a fire hazard for everything. Well, actually, the motor's too big. My choice? LS swap it. Because the motor's so much smaller, you could fit such a big turbo to make up for any of the torque and bonuses of having all this valve train in here. Yeah, the valve train's awesome. Runs awesome. I'll give Ford credit. Awesome running motor. This engine bay? Huge. This motor makes the engine bay look teeny. An LS would fit in here and make this engine bay look like it was massive. I mean, this motor looks like a big block. It's such a huge motor, but it's only 5 liters. Yep. I wish they could have did a little smaller valve train on this motor. Leave a lot more room on the plate for things like this. But anyway, alright, enough yakking. I'm going to continue on with this, and I'll see you on the next video when I figure out what I'm going to do to make this situation work. And with that, like, share, subscribe. As always, I'll see you on the next one.